It started like most HOA drama does, with something small, something petty, and something so ridiculous it almost didn't feel real. I had just gotten back from a weekend camping trip in the mountains. The weather had been perfect, the trails were quiet, and my truck, my pride and joy, had handled every dirt road and sharp corner like a champ. I parked it back in my driveway Sunday night, dust-covered and glorious, not suspecting for a second that it would be the beginning of a war. The next morning, I walked out with my coffee in hand and noticed a neon yellow envelope tucked under my wiper. At first, I thought it was a parking ticket, but that made no sense. I was in my own driveway. Then I saw the HOA logo stamped in the corner and felt my stomach tighten. I tore it open and skimmed the contents. I had officially been cited for a visual violation of neighborhood aesthetic standards, under Section 14B of the HOA regulations. The offense? Parking a commercial-sized vehicle in plain sight. I looked at my truck. A 2022 Dodge Ram, midnight blue, spotless except for a few flecks of mud still drying on the tires. It was clean, well-maintained, and not 1 inch over legal size. I had seen bigger SUVs parked on this very street. Nancy's Lexus GX was bulkier. Steve's Escalade took up almost the entire sidewalk when he pulled in crooked. But somehow, my truck was the problem. The notice stated I had 14 days to remedy the violation or face escalating daily fines starting at $100. That's when I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was personal. The HOA had decided to target me, and for what? Owning a truck? Living like an adult man who occasionally uses a trailer hitch? I laughed at first. Surely this was one of those stupid bureaucratic mix-ups that would blow over after a phone call. So I called the number listed on the letter. The receptionist transferred me to Nancy, the HOA president. She picked up with that condescending tone that all HOA board members seem to practice in the mirror. I introduced myself, explained the situation, and asked her what the problem was. Well, sir, she said, stretching the syllables out like taffy, the community has certain guidelines in place to preserve its charm. Oversized vehicles can disrupt the visual cohesion of our neighborhood. Visual cohesion. Really? Ma'am, with all due respect, my truck is no bigger than half the SUVs parked up and down this block, I said. Well, we don't make exceptions based on who else is violating the rules, she snapped. If you have concerns, you can submit them in writing. That was it. That was the moment. Her smug little smirk came through the phone line like a slap. I realized I wasn't dealing with a community effort here. This was a petty power trip in a pantsuit. Nancy didn't care about rules, she cared about control. That night, I logged onto the neighborhood app just to see if this nonsense was being talked about. And oh, it was. Someone had posted a photo of my truck, complete with the caption, "When you live in a suburb but think it's a monster truck rally." Dozens of little snide comments followed. Is that even legal? Must be compensating for something. Hope the HOA steps in. I scrolled through the replies, seething. Not one person said anything when Steve left his boat trailer on the curb for a week. Not one word when Karen decorated her lawn with 6 inflatable snowmen in October. But me? I was apparently public enemy number 1 for owning a workhorse of a vehicle and daring to park it in my own damn driveway. Still, I tried to play nice. I typed up a detailed response and submitted it to the HOA board, measurements, specs, comparison photos of larger neighborhood vehicles. I even attached an article from the manufacturer showing the Ram was classified as a personal light-duty truck, well within neighborhood standards. 2 days later, I received an automated reply, "Thank you for your submission. The board has reviewed your materials and determined the violation stands." They didn't even try to pretend to consider it. That's when the switch flipped. I wasn't just angry. I was activated. Some people would have just caved, parked around the block, or gotten a smaller vehicle to keep the peace. Not me. I'm a contractor. I use my truck for work. And more importantly, I believe in proportional response. If they were going to come at me over something this absurd, I was going to return the favor, with interest. I started asking questions around the neighborhood. I talked to a guy named James who used to be on the board before he quit over Nancy's Napoleon complex. He told me something curious. The parking lot across the street. The one the HOA used for overflow parking during parties, board meetings, and seasonal events? It didn't belong to them. Technically, the HOA leased that lot from a commercial property company as part of a long-term community agreement. That detail, buried deep in old meeting notes and public records, was all I needed. I found the company, got a contact, and asked if the lot was for sale. They laughed at first, said it was under lease. I asked them to name a number. They gave me one. I added 10%. Suddenly, they were interested. The paperwork took about a week. During that time, the HOA kept sending me letters. Day 6, you now owe $600 in fines. Day 9, your violation has been referred for legal enforcement. Every envelope made me smile wider. They thought they were pushing me into a corner. They had no idea I was buying the building. When the deed went through and the ink dried, I stood in the middle of that lot, watching kids ride bikes between the faded parking lines. The neighborhood dogs barked in the distance. Nancy's Lexus rolled past slowly, her eyes narrowing as she saw me standing there with a clipboard. She had no idea what was coming. But she'd find out soon. They wanted to play HOA games? Fine. I came to play Empire. Owning the parking lot changed everything. It was like flipping a switch. One moment I was the guy getting fined over a pickup truck, and the next, I was a property owner with a prime piece of leverage the HOA didn't even know existed until it was too late. The best part? They had been using that lot for years like it was theirs, hosting community potlucks, block parties, even their monthly HOA meetings in a tented corner space next to the trash bins. They never once questioned who really owned it. Well, now they knew. A week after the purchase closed, I had my attorney send the HOA board a letter notifying them that the lease on the parking lot would be expiring in 30 days, and any renewals would be reviewed under new ownership and terms. I kept it professional, even friendly in tone, just vague enough to stir panic without actually tipping my hand. And stir it did. The next day, I got a knock on my door. It was Nancy. She stood on my porch in one of her signature pastel blazers, gripping a manila folder like it was a court summons. "We need to talk," she said, not even trying to mask the irritation in her voice. I invited her in, offered her coffee. She refused. She jumped straight into it. "We understand you've acquired the parking lot across from the community." "That's correct," I said, nodding. "I thought it might be a good investment." She narrowed her eyes. "You're not planning to make changes that would disrupt community use, are you?" I smiled. "That depends on the community." She didn't stay much longer after that. What she didn't know yet was that I'd already contacted a security company to install new signage and cameras. The lot was going to become a private property, open to lease agreements under strict terms that I had every legal right to enforce. I wasn't trying to make money off it. This wasn't a cash grab. This was personal. See, I had spent the past few weeks observing exactly what kinds of cars used that lot the most. You know what I saw? SUVs. Giant ones. Nancy's Lexus, Steve's Escalade, the Land Rover from the end of the cul-de-sac, even a lifted Jeep with so many mods it looked like it belonged in a monster truck rally. My so-called oversized truck wasn't even close to the biggest vehicle parked there most days. So I decided to have a little fun with the rules, just like they did. I drafted a new parking policy for the lot. It banned all vehicles over 65 inches in height. That knocked out SUVs, trucks, oversized vans, and anything lifted or customized beyond factory standards. The only vehicles allowed? Sedans, compacts, and subcompacts. A few days later, the new signs went up: private parking, height limit strictly enforced. Vehicles over 65 inches subject to immediate towing. I made sure they looked official. Branded. Reflective. 2 at the entrance, 3 inside the lot, and 1 massive banner hanging near the spot where the HOA usually set up their little canopies. You could hear the neighborhood buzz change overnight. The HOA board tried to play it cool, but within 48 hours of the signs going up, Nancy sent out an emergency email blast to the community. We are currently negotiating with the new owner of the community lot to ensure continued use. In the meantime, please be mindful of the posted signage and vehicle requirements. Translation? They had no control anymore, and they were scrambling. The very next morning, Steve's Escalade was towed. I watched from my kitchen window as the tow truck hooked up the massive SUV and rolled off like a slow, gleaming declaration of war. Steve stormed down the street in socks and a hoodie, yelling into his phone. He never once looked toward my house, but I knew he knew. By the end of the week, 5 more vehicles had been removed. Some were towed, some owners preemptively parked elsewhere. It didn't matter. The effect was the same: the HOA's authority was crumbling in real time, and everyone knew who was behind it. But the best moment, hands down, was when Nancy's Lexus GX disappeared. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. She had parked it in her usual spot near the lot center. She was probably inside the HOA office, answering complaint emails and drafting up another passive-aggressive newsletter. The tow truck came in silently, like a predator. Hooked. Lifted. Gone. She came out 15 minutes later and stared at the empty space in horror, spinning in place like someone had just stolen her identity. I half expected her to call the police. Instead, she posted a frantic message on the neighborhood app: "Has anyone seen my car? It may have been towed by mistake. Please contact me immediately if you know what happened." I didn't reply. But someone else did, tagging the new parking lot signage and adding, "I guess the rules are the rules." That one made me laugh out loud. People started parking blocks away. You'd see folks trudging to and from their homes, grocery bags cutting into their hands, all because their SUVs no longer had a home near the community center. Suddenly, I was no longer the villain with the eyesore truck. I was just the guy who knew how to use the rules the way they did. Some residents loved it. A few even came up to shake my hand. "I've got a Civic, I can park anywhere now," one guy said. "I used to circle this lot for 20 minutes before I gave up." Compact car drivers were living their best lives. Others were furious. But they knew better than to try to take me on. After all, I wasn't breaking a single law. I was simply enforcing property rights, the same way they had tried to enforce HOA aesthetics. Nancy didn't give up, of course. She started calling emergency meetings. I was invited to one and attended purely for the sport of it. They tried to plead with me, offering to waive the fines on my truck if I removed the height restriction clause from the lease agreement. I declined politely. I told them I didn't do this for revenge, I did it to restore fairness. Your board targeted me over a perfectly legal truck. Now you can enjoy the exact same standard you tried to enforce. They didn't know what to say. Some of them just stared at their notes. A few looked like they wanted to clap but were too afraid. And I walked out of that meeting like a man who had just leveled the playing field. The HOA thought they were the final authority. They thought they could push me around and bury me in rules and red tape. Instead, they found out what happens when you poke a man who owns more than just his driveway. They found out that sometimes, pettiness can be strategic. And sometimes, the parking lot you stand on belongs to the guy you just tried to fine. The third HOA meeting I attended was nothing short of theatrical. Picture a small, echoing community center with a folding table at the front, 5 stiff-backed HOA board members seated like judges, and about 24 irritated residents filling the metal chairs. The temperature in the room was high, both literally and emotionally. Someone had forgotten to adjust the AC. Or maybe they'd killed it on purpose, hoping to sweat me out. If so, bad strategy. Nancy opened the meeting with a strained smile. "We're here tonight to discuss a matter affecting our community's shared spaces." Her voice had that sharp edge, the kind that's polite on the surface but ready to explode underneath. Specifically, the abrupt changes to our parking situation. I didn't say a word. I just sat in the front row, legs crossed, a folder in my lap labeled Lease Terms, Current and Proposed. I watched her squirm under the attention of neighbors who were clearly less interested in HOA drama and more concerned about why they now had to park 4 blocks away to visit their own friends. Steve stood up first. His voice had the confidence of someone who'd once coached youth football and never let go of the whistle. "Look, I've lived here 15 years. I pay my dues. Why is my Escalade suddenly being towed like I'm some kind of criminal? Who gave him the right to do that?" He jabbed a thumb at me. I smiled. "That would be me," I said calmly. "I own the parking lot now. And towing unauthorized vehicles is a right that comes with property ownership." I reached into my folder and held up a printed copy of the deed with a gold notary seal. Fully legal. Fully filed with the county. Gasps. A few murmurs. Someone near the back clapped once before stopping awkwardly. Nancy cleared her throat. "Let's all remember to keep this civil." A short woman with graying hair stood up next. "This has gone too far. First it's the SUVs, then what? Are we going to start banning red cars because they clash with the neighborhood palette? Where does this end?" "Great question," I said. "Let's talk about where it started." I pulled up a slide on the projector I had asked to borrow. They hadn't realized what I'd be using it for. The screen showed a high-resolution photo of my Dodge Ram parked perfectly in my driveway, followed by a copy of the original violation notice I'd received from the HOA. It started here. With a truck that complied with every state and county regulation but was deemed an aesthetic disruption by this board. Then I flipped to another slide, side-by-side measurements of my truck, Nancy's Lexus GX, and Steve's Escalade. Spoiler alert, my truck was shorter than both. This wasn't about size. This was about picking a target. And if you want to play that game, you better be ready when someone plays it better. The room shifted. You could feel it. People weren't just upset about the parking situation anymore, they were starting to see the bigger picture. The HOA's power plays were coming into the light. They'd messed with the wrong guy, and now everyone else was paying the price. Nancy tried to regain control. "We admit there may have been an overreach with the original notice. But that doesn't justify creating policies that punish the entire neighborhood." "You mean like the ones you create every month?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Banning solar panels because they disrupt roof uniformity? Fining people over lawn lengths by half an inch? Telling a retired veteran he can't fly a flag from his own porch?" I turned to the crowd. "Anyone here ever felt targeted by the HOA?" Half the room raised their hands. The others looked like they wanted to but weren't ready to risk it. Nancy paled. The board looked uncomfortable for the first time since I'd ever seen them. The truth was catching up, and the walls were getting thin. A man in a business suit stood next. "I don't drive an SUV, but I've had 3 clients tell me they're reconsidering buying here because of the parking situation. This affects property values." I nodded. "Funny you mention that. Because nothing affects property values faster than HOA overreach. If you want to solve this problem, the solution is simple." I flipped to the final slide, Proposal to Restore Parking Privileges. It laid out terms in plain language. The HOA would formally rescind their violation against my truck. They would issue a written apology acknowledging selective enforcement and agree to a policy of no aesthetic vehicle regulations unless tied to explicit safety or zoning laws. In exchange, I would remove the height restriction clause from the parking lease and reallow SUVs and large vehicles, provided they follow basic registration and courtesy guidelines. The room fell into a stunned silence. Nancy was shaking her head before I even finished. "That's extortion," she hissed. "It's negotiation," I replied. "You enforced rules on private property. Now I am. We can both keep playing this game, or we can reset the board." The other board members huddled quietly, whispering. One of them, a younger guy named Brett who'd always seemed a little less robotic than the rest, finally stood and addressed the room. "I move that we hold a vote. Let the community decide." That was my second favorite moment of the night. The vote happened right there. Residents filled out slips, and the results were counted by 2 volunteers, one from the board and one from the community. It wasn't even close, 87 in favor of my proposal, 6 against. The board looked like someone had kicked the legs out from under their folding table. After the vote, people started walking up to shake my hand, some patting me on the back. "About time someone stood up to them," one guy said. "You should run for the board," another woman suggested. I smiled politely but shook my head. I had no interest in becoming the thing I just dismantled. Nancy approached me quietly at the end. She didn't look angry anymore. Just tired. "You won," she said. I looked her in the eye. "No one wins when neighbors go to war. But we can stop fighting now." She nodded and walked away, maybe for the first time realizing the limits of her power. The next week, a formal apology letter was placed in every resident's mailbox. It was short, clipped, but it admitted wrongdoing. My truck stayed parked in my driveway without another word. The lot signs came down, replaced with new ones welcoming residents of all vehicle types, under reasonable courtesy guidelines, of course. Somewhere in the middle of all this, Nancy quietly traded her Lexus for a Honda Civic. Word got around she didn't want to deal with any more visibility issues. And me? I still own the parking lot. Still let compact cars park for free, just as a nod to the ones who never gave me grief. But more importantly, the board never tried anything again. Because they knew, I wasn't just a guy with a truck. I was a man with the land beneath their wheels. And that made all the difference. The neighborhood was quiet now, almost eerily so. No more late-night HOA emails, no more passive-aggressive notices about non-conforming exterior features being slipped into mailboxes like poison pen letters. The once boisterous meetings had been scaled down to polite monthly check-ins, mostly discussing minor landscaping contracts or community events. The board had grown smaller, too. 3 of the original 5 members had resigned quietly over the last 2 months. Even Nancy had stepped down, citing stress-related health concerns. No one protested. But none of that was the real victory. The real victory was subtle. It came in the form of little changes, almost invisible unless you were paying attention. Residents began to relax. People stopped whispering every time they wanted to paint their door a color that wasn't board-approved beige. You saw wind chimes again. Bird feeders. Garden gnomes. Small symbols of quiet defiance that were now just life. And my truck? It stood in my driveway like a badge of honor. Sometimes I washed it just to remind the neighbors that it was still there, still too unsightly for the board that once tried to exile it. But more often, it was covered in dust from weekend camping trips or moving jobs I did for free for a couple of neighbors. One time, an older lady down the street, who used to avoid eye contact with me, asked if I could help her granddaughter move into college housing 2 towns over. I didn't hesitate. That's what neighbors do. No paperwork, no fines. Just community. One Sunday, a kid came riding down the street on a homemade go-kart. His dad trailed behind with a camcorder, filming every bump and turn. I smiled from my porch as the kid swerved into my driveway, giggling, then back onto the sidewalk. For a split second, I remembered how the board once tried to fine a different family for letting their kid use sidewalk chalk in front of their house. Public defacement of community property, they had called it. That family had moved out years ago. But the ghosts of those decisions lingered. Not anymore. The new board was different. After the vote, and after the dust had settled, they invited me to sit on the board. I declined, but I offered to be a consultant if they ever had questions about property law or community organizing. I even helped them draft a new charter, a short, common-sense document that basically boiled down to, "Don't be a jerk." It was adopted unanimously. Meanwhile, the parking lot continued to serve its quiet purpose. I never reinstalled the height restriction signs. Instead, I posted a simple message at the entrance: be considerate. Be legal. Be kind. It wasn't binding, but it was more effective than any set of rules the HOA had ever written. People respected it. They respected the space, and, to my surprise, they respected me. That respect showed up in the oddest places. A retired Marine offered to repaint the community mailboxes for free. A couple of teenagers started a weekend car wash in the lot, compact cars only, as a joke. A single mom who had once been fined over an inflatable pool now hosted neighborhood movie nights with a projector in her backyard. Everyone brought their own chairs. And no one asked for permission. I realized then that I hadn't just won a petty feud with a power-drunk HOA. I'd reminded a community what it felt like to actually be one. But it wasn't without its loose ends. A few months later, I was closing up the bed of my truck after hauling a load of lumber when I saw Nancy walking slowly down the street. No Lexus. No clipboard. Just a plain tote bag slung over her shoulder. She paused at the edge of my driveway. I waited. She took a deep breath and said, "I wanted to say thank you." I blinked, sure I'd misheard. For what? I asked, wiping my hands on a rag. For not turning this place into a war zone. You could have made it worse. Humiliated me. Made everything personal. I let out a short laugh. You mean like how I was treated over a truck? She looked down, then nodded. Exactly. There was a pause. She reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. I wrote a personal apology a while ago. Didn't have the guts to deliver it until now. I took it. Didn't open it, not yet. Why now? Because I realized you weren't just trying to win. You were trying to change things. I nodded. I wasn't the one who started this, Nancy. But yeah, I wanted it to end better than it began. She gave a faint smile. It did. She turned and walked away. No speech, no final word. Just the quiet dignity of someone trying, however late, to make peace. Back inside, I opened the envelope. It wasn't long. A few handwritten lines, the handwriting careful and formal. I lost sight of what this neighborhood was supposed to be. I'm sorry I made it personal. I hope one day, people forget the worst of me and remember the best of you. Nancy. I folded it up and slipped it into the glove box of my truck. Not because I needed to hold on to it, but because every once in a while, it's good to remember that people can change. Even HOA presidents. The final twist came a year later. The new board organized a block party, first one in years. Food trucks lined the parking lot. Kids played cornhole while music drifted from rented speakers. Half the neighborhood showed up. There were no permits. No complaints. Just good food, laughter, and a sense that maybe, just maybe, we were finally past the pettiness. As the sun set, someone handed me a microphone. Speech, they shouted. I stepped up, looked around at the smiling faces, the kids eating snow cones, the neighbors who had once filed complaints now sitting together on picnic blankets. I don't have much to say, I began. Just that sometimes, the best way to fight back is to build something better. They clapped. Not because I'd won, but because they had too. We didn't beat the HOA. We outgrew it. And that, more than anything, was the sweetest victory of all.